What's going on? It's episode 185. I'm here, and only me have to suffer. We're talking about Brumation, but first, sponsor shoutouts, Vettina.com. Use code #ShitHappens with the exclamation point and the pound sign for $5 off the crypto panel. Vettina.com. Shane Kelley spelled out Xotics. He just got some panther chameleons, which I don't know if he's spoiled on his Instagram yet, but if you're a Patreon member, you would have seen him. Check, he's on an adventure right now, and I think that's good. So check out Shane Kelley, Small Town Xotics. Bravo Ball Pythons. She just got in a new Dominican Red Mountain Bow. That's very cool. Congratulations. Check out bravozulupythons.com for all whatever's available. I don't even know. Some stuff probably. Stoneage ball pythons, Pacific Northwest ball python breeder. I also don't know what he's doing. I'm assuming he's living his best life and having fun breeding clown pied ball pythons. Thank you, Justin. Andrew, Powerhouse pythons. He breeds ball pythons, rodents, sells go for cocoa. I think he has a Stimson's clutch coming, which is very cool. Congratulations, Andrew. Powerhouse pythons. Gray family snakes. Roger accused me of using AI. Wrong. I used clip art to create an image, which is fine because someone got paid for that clip art at some point, and I paid for it using it. So there. Anyway, Gray family snakes. They've updated their morph market, and just so you know, there's special secret pricing on the grayfamilysnakes.com website if you're interested in purchasing. It's been heating up out there. I agree 100%. A lot more inquiries. So if there's something you need from last year, now's the time to get it because you can actually ship now, which is good. And Chris at Reptilia, he said colubrids are up and awake, eating, having fun, pooping. Very nice. Argentines have their first lock. The scrubs are warming up, and ball python eggs should be coming down the pipes in a few weeks. March 16th, the Leahy Valley ReptiFest show, and March 29th, Gettysburg Expo. If you want to see him in person and still looking for chipper distributors, go to cocodude.com to check that out. Thank you, Chris. You know, I never said I was good at ads, so y'all signed up for something. Quirky's here, Chris is here, Jennifer's here, Roger's here, Aurora's here. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. I recognize I should have done a Brumation episode about 5 months ago, but perfect is the enemy of good. So no AI clip art. Real art. Emma's here. Chris is here. And I think it was Andrew actually that asked for it. So I decided to make it last night at about 11 p.m. And I was like, maybe I should delay. And I finished enough. So we'll go as long as we go. And we'll talk as much as we need to talk. And I don't think we're going to learn anything really, but maybe we'll enjoy the process along the way. If you're audio only, there are some pictures. I'll try to describe said pictures. But you might want to go to YouTube. Maybe. There are still audio only homies, so shout out to them after all these years. All right. Ready? Ready, Freddie? Very cool. So being cold sucks. It's not that fun for an ectotherm. So thermoregulation is hard. That makes sense. Like they have an optimum temperature range, and when you just can't, it's just physically impossible. That makes it hard because your proteins want to function at a particular temperature. So what do? You try to warm up, but you can't. There's way less food in the wintertime, and there's sometimes limited liquid water. So you want to avoid all those negatives. And sometimes there is liquid water, but that can be its own problem. It can kill you that way. And Costanza, 1988, and all these are listed in the YouTube description if you want to read them yourself. He actually like found that animals were dying less if they were partially submerged in water while brumating them, which I don't know if they really should be, because that would be like inducing them to be more cold than they really need to be. But there is extra lethality to not having access to any water during brumation. That was garter snakes, by the way. In general, reptiles are capital breeders, so that means they're using the energy from the prior active season for all reproductive output early in the beginning of the next active season. So they have to store calories and have them be deployable the next spring. They can't, like a bird, eat a bunch real quick in the spring, make a bunch of eggs, take care of it. They need to be saving it because there's not enough time in the active season for them to accumulate a lot of resources. So in general, brumation exists to limit calorie loss. So they have something to reproduce with, limit dehydration, and limit any risk from freezing. Hell yeah. So all of these animals do these things in different ways. So you could migrate, which is something I'm not really talking about, but sea turtles migrate. They're not into it. They just leave. And some of them get stuck if like a cold front comes in too soon. So like there's a lot of like cold shock sea turtle clinics in whatever, Cape Cod, New England, because they just, they can't make it out in time. They get cold shock. They get brought in. They don't make it down to Florida fast enough. And then what a lot of animals do, because they're not very good at migrating, because they are slow and small, is they brumate instead, which is what we're talking about. There's two kinds of brumation. Passive, which is this animal, snake, lizard, frog, just gets cold. And it's like, I'm going to be cold now. I can't fight this, and I'm just going to be cold, and I'll just wait until I'm not cold anymore. The other one is active, which is interesting because like tegus do it. This is Milsom et al. 2008, where they will sort of actively just decide, like, it is going to be cold soon, so I'm going to down-regulate my metabolism, what I'm doing. Or they can just choose to do it. And then you're like, well, is that really hibernation instead, but there's a more active role? I don't know. It seems like the delineation between brumation and hibernation is sort of even fuzzier here. And maybe it's actually fuzzier everywhere, because garter snakes also do some processes that imply that they're regulating their body in a different way. They're not just getting cold. So these garter snakes in Holden were regulating corticosteroid during their whole brumation, and like serum glucose levels, and that probably gets them, so they're in like a state of stress during brumation, but they weren't like that before brumation, and then afterwards maybe that helps them sort of ramp back up post emergence in the spring. So maybe this is less of a dichotomy than people think, and there are sort of hormonal things going on in everybody. They don't just get cold and stay cold. They get cold and then they do something about it. But you would need way more research on that. Another thing is, like, if you were going to do corticosteroid in sheds, the sheds are delayed, the stress response. So you would need like to take the sheds to test for the hormones well into the spring to tell what was going on back in the winter. Listen. And then for brumation, you can brumate independently or in a group. A lot of them do brumate independently, probably most of them, frankly. But if they are in a group, that's usually because the resource, the brumation site, is rare in their environment. And we'll talk about some examples of what could be rare. But that forcing them into proximity also forces other sort of evolutionary Traits, tendencies. Like, for example, garter snakes that have to share brumation sites tend to recognize conspecifics, and garter snakes recognize themselves by smell. So that's just something they have sort of evolved, so they sort of get to know their friends and they know what's going on. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. I think what most people think of brumation sites are like dens, so like rattlesnake dens, where they congregate around a specific site that is, below the frost line, but above the water table. And in a lot of the Northeast and sort of northern areas, this is what they need. They can't use anything else. They need to get below the frost line. So they need some sort of rocky outcrop that has fissures that go down to be safe. Maybe a basement, whatever. And so there's a lot of incentive from wildlife managers, park people, to make artificial hibernacula, because this is like a limiting factor for the number of specifically large snakes, but all snakes, to live somewhere cold. So they'll be like, you should make one, and here's the frost line row, the water table. So it's got to be above the water table, below the frost line, have good drainage. They can get in and out of all these like interstitial spaces. So if we made more hibernacula further north, we would have more snakes probably. Like, we don't even hit the carrying capacity for large snakes because they're so busy competing over hibernacula, because there aren't that many, because they need a very particular kind. Yes. What's up? Some of them do. And the smaller you are, the less discrete of a hibernacula you can have. And we'll talk about that a little bit. But if you're big-bodied and you live in the north, you need a very specific place to protect yourself from freezing cold. Because rattlesnakes, and they tend to, these ones also like can recognize conspecifics too. And then further south, there aren't big rocky outcroppings really in, the coastal plain. So what do? You usually rely on like the ecosystem services of a turtle or some sort of digging species to make burrows that get you below the frost line, above the water table, and then you have a place. If they didn't exist, you wouldn't have the ability for other animals to protect themselves from, cold weather. I think people sort of intuitively understand that, but it's like more important than you think. And including like Pituophis, they could dig stuff out too, or whatever. But you need these sort of very specific microhabitats for the whole system to work. So this Grove 2024 was a master's thesis, I believe, and she found that water moccasin babies would follow not just conspecifics, but siblings more often than anything else. So like there's a lot of like incidental evidence that babies will follow adults, babies will follow siblings in the fall to find the limited resources of hibernacula. But they'll still use something else if they can't figure it out. They'll still use a basement. They'll still use a rock pile. But they want to find the resource they know is a safe place to brumate. So there's a lot of evidence that they're thinking about each other. But if they are a species that doesn't recognize conspecifics, then that means they don't really need to find the shared resource. Mm-hmm. This is a really old paper, Cal's 1941, and this is in the Coachella Valley in California. So this is like a sand dune with some mesquite trees on it, and there was smaller sand dunes with like herbaceous matter, and obviously they were knocking them over to plant strawberries or something stupid, who knows. But while they were knocking it over, Cal was there, and he was in the wintertime seeing which animals came out of the sand dunes, because there was no rocky outcrops to brumate sort of in the interstitial places for animals. So where are all these desert animals brumating? There's no burrows really. And like the bottom of the area is like hard pan. So they were brumating in these sort of hillocks, sand dune that are sort of fixed with herbaceous material. And a lot of them, because it's the desert, weren't actually brumating very deeply and not necessarily brumating in groups. So on this side is lizards, and then we get into snakes. So some of them would be like 1 inch down, 2 inches down, 5 inches down. But some of them are much deeper, and maybe that was a burrow. But some of them would just like squeeze into the sand a little bit and be like, well, I'm just going to make it. I'm just going to try to make it. And his paper talked about them like having stuff in their stomachs over the winter. And then it would be cold again and they would be stuck and they would just try to make it. So in a lot of places, there's not a discrete place where you need a brumate. They could just dig into the sand somewhere where it's kind of safe and then wake up again in a couple days. And it was obviously, maybe it's not obvious, smaller animals are less deep. Smaller animals respond to like daytime temperatures getting hotter. Bigger animals go deeper and don't necessarily wake up to go party like the little ones do. So brumation is sort of a spectrum of how much they're waking up, going to sleep. Turtles. I mean, we talked about turtle buttholes, but here we are, we're back. So turtles, you're like, oh, it's a turtle. It's totally a normal animal. Wrong. They're actually really weird. So turtles, almost all of them just decide not to breathe all winter long. Most of the North American turtles brumate underwater. I don't know why. That just like blows my mind for some reason. A lot of them will brumate just in the dirt, substrate silt on the bottom of the bank. Wood turtles, which is what I did, would sort of embed themselves underneath the bank because they were in relatively fast flowing streams. And so they would be in like muskrat burrows under the bank or under where sort of a root ball was sort of under run by the river, and they'd get up there so they don't get washed away. But they're not breathing that whole time. They don't go to the surface. They can move a little bit, and they will move sometimes, and they move more and more as the season goes, even if they're still not breathing yet. But they're not breathing. So how do they do that? How do they do that? So most of the breathing, well, first, there's two kinds of turtles. Hidden neck turtles, which is what we have in North America, and side neck turtles. And the only ones that breathe through their buttholes are side neck turtles. So none of the ones in North America do it. And they use the cloacal bursae, which is a weird pouch around their cloaca that fills with water. And then inside neck turtles has like papillae that sort of absorb oxygenated water and do CO2 transfer. I mean, that's cool. And these ones still have bursae, but they don't have papillae. So everyone's like, well, maybe it's like a buoyancy thing in these ones, but these ones evolved it for, gas exchange. So how do our turtles do it? They're just doing it through their skin. Passive diffusion through integument is the principal avenue of aquatic O2. Then different turtles have different tolerances for hypoxia. So some turtles need to be in a really cold, fast-moving, well-oxygenated stream to brumate, like wood turtles. Some of them can handle just living in slop, like snappers. They'll just be in mud, hypoxic mud. Doesn't matter how cold the water is, how well oxygenated it is. If there's no oxygen in the mud, I don't know. They just survive. Good for them. And then a lot of them are doing it with, anoxic reactions to make ATP. They don't make a lot of ATP. Well, they don't need a lot of ATP. So like they're doing that. They make a lot of lactic acid though. So like how do they keep from having lactic acid build up and dying? Some of them do die from that. There was a couple of papers where they like made, this is not very nice, made baby turtles go to like the extreme of lactic acid buildup, and they died. And they know how long it takes. But so different turtles have different abilities to do that. But the older turtles, not babies as much, but older turtles use a mechanism where they like buffer the lactic acid with their shells. So they'll release carbonate from their shells into their bloodstream and then store lactic acid back into their bones and then dump all that back out once they start breathing again, which is pretty cool, but also who knew that realistically? And because bigger turtles are bigger, they have more calcium, phosphorus in their shells. They can buffer more. They can tolerate more hypoxia. I don't know if we've learned anything yet. Hopefully we did. Okay. Box turtles are even weirder to me because they're not, I don't know. They're not that good at brumating, but somehow they all make it. They don't brumate in water. They don't use butt breathing. They don't use, they basically stop breathing on land, but they use sort of whatever, and maybe they breathe a little bit, but they're basically so like clunked in underwater. They have to be breathing through the integument anyway. So what they do is they just on land will just find a spot that seems kind of nice to dig in. They'll dig down under the leaf litter, dig down barely, almost not at all in the soil. And they'll just be like, that's good enough. And this is like 8 centimeters. That seems like a lot. And then there's like a couple centimeters here. It's wrong. Sometimes they're just on the surface. They're barely even dug down at all. There's barely any leaf litter on them. I've seen them in the wild, like basically exposed. They'll dig down most of their head, but leave their butt hanging out. And they just exist like that. And they can experience basically freezing temperatures and not freeze. They did it. Congratulations, wood turtles. You're winners for surviving. There's a lady who makes Instagram reels where she's digging her box turtles down like a foot. And I'm like, lady, you don't need to do that. They probably couldn't emerge successfully without you intervening. If you just give them some nice fluffy dirt with some leaf litter on top, that's enough anywhere where they're native to for them to be fine all winter. So if you ever walk around the woods in the winter, you could see a box. You'll just see their shell almost exposed. It's wild, crazy. Me too. Yes, that lady. She doesn't need to do that. That's what I'm saying. Because the box turtles are very sensitive to like being like, oh, it's kind of warm, so they'll wiggle closer to the surface as the season goes on to get like to know when they should leave. They wouldn't get those cues if they were a foot down, is what I'm saying. So that lady, it's wrong. Okay, so turtles also, baby turtles will overwinter in the nests. So not all the members of the species, even in the same location, it depends on the location of the nest, they must hatch in the nest, and they have to either make a choice, the baby turtles. They have to leave, go out, try to see if they can get into water to brumate in water, or they're like, it's already too cold, and then they commit. Painted turtles do this like most famously, but blandings, even baby box turtles, snappers, all kinds of stuff, northern stuff, makes a decision to brumate in the nest. And sometimes this is not the best decision and they die or they desiccate because they're smaller and they can't do as much anoxic reproduction. But some of them, including painted turtles, can be super cooled. So they have the ability, especially when they're slightly older hatchlings, to just not freeze. Like the extracellular fluid can freeze, but the cells won't freeze. And they usually use glucose and they just tough it out. Little baby box turtles will dig down, but baby sliders, they can be super cooled. I think the mortality gets worse. Obviously, the longer, there's a paper where somebody was freezing turtles. I think it was this guy. The mortality gets worse the longer it goes, the younger the turtles, and like the construction of the nest. But they can be super cold and they just make it. They just wake up. It's fine. So most amphibians, They do better at cooler temperatures in general than reptiles. So a lot of times we'd be like, that's not an active reptile temperature. It might actually be like a fine temperature for activity, very slow activity for a salamander or a frog. Like usually a lot of the amphibians emerge from their brumation really early, like way before a big reptile would, because they don't need as much thermal energy to get going. So where I was from in West Virginia, spotteds would run in March, early March, and like the nighttime lows might be in the 30s, and they'd be walking around doing stuff. So they still do brumate. They still want to avoid freezing, but they can get away with more. Just like, I'm going to crawl under this log, this rock. I'm going to go in this crevice. They don't necessarily need to be quite as picky as a big-bodied reptile because they can get very close to freezing themselves and be totally fine. So this is a green salamander in like a rock crevice, and some of them go really deep, but I think they're just, eat stuff, having fun. And wood frogs, I think most people know this, can freeze. Let me air quote this, solid. So they seem totally solid, but like the cells inside are not frozen. It's just the water between cells. So what they do to get ready for this, they usually like bring urea, glycerol, and glucose into the cells, which sort of forces water out. They have certain proteins that keep the crystals from getting too big, which would like stab things. And they just freeze. And there's some parts in the Alaska where they freeze each night and defrost each day. I don't know what that's like, but they do it. They do it. And so wood frogs are like the most northern, like the only amphibian above the Arctic Circle. This is a good skill. And the ones in Alabama do not produce as much glucose in the winter as the ones up here. So there's definitely like a selection pressure towards like antifreeze production in wood frogs, but they all can do it to some extent. And I think there's other ones that are related, like chorus frogs that can do similar, but maybe not as extreme, so they don't go as north. It's crazy. And peepers. I've seen gray tree frogs do it too. But wood frogs are the most famous, so they don't really try to find a brumation site. They might like huddle up under a log, but they're not. You can't freeze a rattlesnake, but you can freeze a wood frog. So a wood frog isn't like bound to these very specific sites as intensely. So why do animals that are freeze prone, why do they come out randomly in the wintertime? Why? What are they doing? And the answer is nobody really knows, because some of them will eat, and knowing that digestion would be impaired, why do they eat? Because they probably can't even finish the meal, but maybe they can. Some of them don't eat at all, and they know they shouldn't eat, but they still come out, look around, try to sunbathe, but it's like 30 out, and they're sitting in a 40-degree sunbeam patch. Like, what is the point of doing that? And so warming up and not eating would be a net negative to energy stores. It would be bad to like the capital that they've saved up, but they still seem to do it a lot. So nobody really knows, but presumably there's some sort of physiological benefits that override the energetic costs. And then this is Huey et al. Perhaps growth, repair, immune function, or future reproduction functions happen because they woke up. When like squirrels are in torpor, they will wake up to sleep. So they'll be in torpor, and so their brain function needs to work because they need to sleep to keep their brain going. But these snakes, lizards, large body lizards, large snakes, they're awake. They're doing stuff. And I've seen them out, in January, and sometimes you're like, did they get caught by a warm day, or are they doing this on purpose? Nobody really knows. But I think something that's like not listed here is water. I think a lot of snakes will wake up just to go try to find dew or suck water off of snow. Because if you're Brumating a long time, you can just die from lack of water. Because not all brumation sites are particularly moist and lubricating. Not very demure. So there's something going on there. And I think I don't know which arthropod species, but one of them they found they did sort of an ion exchange. Like they came out, turned their kidneys on a little bit, peed, and then went back again. So there probably is like a physiological function too. But it is interesting. And so I think when people do like wellness checks on brumating snakes in captivity, or if you like wellness check your diamonds, pythons, or Bredli or whatever, you sort of warm them up, take them out, make sure they're drinking. It's probably normal. Mm-hmm. And I didn't really make a slide for it, but I read a paper about a Chinese viper. I don't remember what the species, but the females would brumate, but the males would not. And so the males would just tolerate being cold because they were smaller, and the females would brumate. So there's something about body size and like how much cooling or how much thermal energy you need from the environment to warm up enough that it's safe enough. And so like a bigger animal will choose safety over whatever sort of physiological benefits are to like a little bit of warming up. So that was interesting because I think that matches what happened or what we talked about last week, where was it his diamonds? I don't even know, his carpets with William, where the females would just stay and the males would get up. So maybe, obviously on the other side of the globe, the same things are happening. Large body females would be more protective of themselves of cold than smaller bodied males potentially. And that sort of matches also what happens in the Everglades, where large Burmese pythons are much more susceptible to cold snaps than small Burmese pythons because, of that thermal inertia. The one little patch of sun doesn't get them warm enough to stay within the safe zone. So I don't know. It is interesting. I think people should wake their snakes up sometimes and make sure they're okay, is what I'm saying. And then Pepper's Farm remembers something that happens to the neurons in a mammal's brain when it hibernates or brumates, that a lot of them die. The connections, synapses, not doing good. But for some reason, in a lot of the reptiles and amphibians that have been tested, they remember. They go to sleep for 5 months. You wake them up. This was Wilkinson et al. 2017 was a trial of fire salamanders. If they tested them against a t-test, their prize on one side was like a mossy little house. Other side, no fun mossy house. And so they trained them on it. They brumated some of them, and they didn't brumate the control, and they tested them, and they remembered the test. And that jives with, there's a lot of other papers about it, but wood turtles will be underwater for, 5 months, 6 months, sleeping, not breathing, doing nothing, barely existing. And they will wake up, walk half a mile upstream, downstream, find their favorite log, and just go back to it and keep doing that with no apparent loss of brain function. And so a lot of people look at sort of reptile or amphibian models for maybe like, why are they like that? Why are they good? Like, why do their brains work so much better than ours in a low oxygen environment? And maybe we can't fix it, but you could probably figure out ways to protect brain cells by researching these animal models. I find that very cool. The other thing is, like, I kind of forgot about it. If you can freeze like this, then maybe we can freeze and store hearts or whatever, if we can figure out how to force enough glucose into the cells to keep the tissues from exploding. Because we can't freeze a heart now. We have to airlift it or whatever. But if you can solve a wood frog, you can solve tissue and organ storage. So I feel that that's pretty cool. They don't forget. But your squirrel is kind of that's like 20% dumber when it wakes up after hibernation. And then final thoughts, feelings. I don't know. Does brumating or not change lifespan? And I think a lot of people, I've heard it both ways, but I mostly hear that if you brumate, the snake will live longer. And I don't know if that's true. I couldn't find any evidence if that's true. Maybe. I think in some species, their corticosteroid levels are so high when they're brumating that that's just like a stressor. Realistically, it's not making anything better. And then you're like, well, the metabolism's lower, so whatever. Maybe there's no less cell division, less insulin. Yeah, so maybe it's like a balance in the end, because some stress is good. If you have no stress, you die in a different way. Do you have a question? I missed it. Every time I switch from jacket to shorts in the same day in Texas, I wonder about the snakes. I think this is kind of what I'm getting at, is I have a feeling that the species that live in places where they don't have like strict, hard brumations because the weather is up and down, whatever, those animals may actually benefit from not being brumated at all. Because it might actually just be stressful, not good. So that's maybe why corn snakes in southern species, you can breed them without brumating them at all. They don't need it. So I wonder if like syncing them up forcefully with stress, with being cold, is good. Good is in quotes here. But some animals probably do need it because they need the hormones to induce. Like I was trying to look at like the rate of testosterone post growth, because there's some squirrels and stuff that their testes only finish developing in hibernation. I was like, is there a snake species whose testes only finish developing in brumation? I don't have evidence for that, but I think some species, the ones that are on the middle would prefer not to be brumated at all. Now, I'm not saying don't brumate them because it does sync everybody up and it's very nice for like management. So I don't know if animals would live longer if they're brumated, if they're those kind of animals. But animals that need to be brumated for full functionality probably should be brumated. But are we even brumating them correctly? Because most of them should be brumated for 5 months, 6 months, a long time. So is the brumation that we're doing even the kind that would give them a longer life anyway? I don't know. And also, I've read the paper, but I couldn't find it, and I know it exists, that like the post-hormone changes may rely more on light than on temperature anyway. And in some species, maybe lack of food than temperature anyway. And you're like, well, might as well just do all three because that's what's happening in the wild. Maybe. Ideally, it should be cold enough that they don't lose weight, dark enough that they think something's happening, that they're feeling feelings, and they should not have food and then have a bolus of food in the spring because it's springtime. So they feel like something's happening. So you can induce that hormonal change without really cold temperatures, but it would be very species dependent. The other thing is sometimes animals become gravid in the fall, in the winter, or in the spring. So how much of that affects all of that? Like, should you keep them cold to keep the sperm still fresh if they're a fall breeder anyway? I don't know. It's very species dependent. So Roger says, Sanzanias are really interesting how they need to be 55 to breed, but don't brumate. But maybe they are brumating is what I'm saying. Maybe whatever, temperature, light, whatever, is causing enough physiological change that they are making choices. And that's what makes them breed. Yeah, maybe. I don't know. Every time I see somebody who has a pet snake, it's usually 30 years old, corn snake. It's got cataracts, and they never brumated it once in their life. So for a corn snake, I think they would prefer not to be brumated. They would rather have all their proteins functioning just the way they want it. They don't want to be overfed. They don't want to be underfed. But if they could be moderately fed, not brumate, I think a corn snake would actually live longer. But for a Sansonia, I don't know. I think they might need it. Right. The other thing about the food shortage to food excess stimulant is, what if a yellow rat snake in Georgia does not store enough calorie capital in the fall to breed? They hide because it's not super cold, but it's cold enough that you can't find anything good. There's no good chickies around, no good mousies. They're just hiding. It's kind of cold. It doesn't whatever, but they just get skinnier and skinnier because it's not that hot outside. So then the species that double clutch, like maybe rat snakes, corn snakes, whatever, they're not double clutching because they actually want to double clutch in the wild. They're double clutching because that's a response to the fact that they don't brumate that well. They lose too much capital. And so the first potential time they can build follicles in the spring, most of them aren't ready. So they have to do it on their second one. So even though we can double clutch them in captivity because we feed them a lot, most of them, some of the ones that are ready might do it in the spring. Some of the ones that aren't ready will use the spring food bolus to induce a second follicular development phase. Because does anybody know that Pantherophis double clutches in the wild? Do they? Maybe. But I don't know if they do. I bet it's just the option to use spring food in warmer climates because you don't necessarily accrue that much capital over the previous active period anyway. You know what I mean? I don't know if people should brumate for 5 months. I don't even know what that means. There's a lot of people who are fixated on replicating the natural habitat of an animal in the enclosure, which is fine. We love that. But they don't fixate on the temporal parts of that. And this is an unrelated thought, but I couldn't resist. I've never seen somebody do what happens to snakes in North America anyway. Ever? I'm going to go with ever, including me. And that is the diurnal to nocturnal shift. So a lot of snakes will be very active during the day when it's cold outside, cool, spring, fall, because it's not within their thermal parameter to be running around when it's sub 60 degrees outside. They want it to be 60 to 85. That would be where a big colubrid running around would want to be operating in. They also don't want to be running around when it's 85 to 115. So they switch to nighttime mode and they only operate then. This includes in places like where I'm from, West Virginia. In the spring, black rat snakes will run around only during the day. They're only diurnal because that's the only time it's really that warm. They will breed diurnally then. They will lay eggs diurnally then. Around June, they switch to being nocturnal again. Does anybody in captivity replicate it being so hot they have to switch to being nocturnal? No. They probably don't even see ultraviolet radiation, particularly during the summer, unless it's just the filtered stuff through leaves. So assuming all these animals are really diurnal when they're actually just fixated on a temperature regime is something nobody talks about or thinks about. And I don't know if we should make cages 100 degrees and force the snakes to not only be active when it becomes bright out, because you don't necessarily need to perfectly mimic a habitat, to have ethical care. Yeah, I know some people disagree with that. But, this isn't normal, what we're doing. Nerodia do it too. And Nerodia very diurnal for a while anyway. And then this is sort of back to what we talked about mid-brumation emergencies, where we like intentionally make brumation longer, intentionally wake them up, give them water, give them a runabout, show them some UV light, take them outside, let them think about if it's winter or not, and then put them back down again. Are we like reducing lifespan by not performing some sort of physiological function during brumation? I don't know. I'm not implying that. Maybe I am implying that. Because I do like relatively short brumations at 8 weeks. And if they don't get water during the 8 weeks, it depends on like the substrate you put them on, but they can be kind of dried out, crispy when they come out. So you really need to at least give them like wellness water checks. But I wonder sometimes if because we're, I don't know, doing whatever we're doing, we're sort of limiting the snakes. Maybe they should just be cool for short bouts, but not cold, and allowed to warm up each day. Maybe that would be enough. And make it dark. Jennifer says, that's the last thing. I don't know if y'all want to talk. That was what I was thinking about. Jennifer says, my snake room gets a lot of light. It is amazing how their behavior changes and is changing. They're so alert and the males are pacing. I think the light is a huge factor. They know the days are getting longer. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's hard to be like prescriptive and be like, everyone's doing it wrong. Because clearly snakes breed in captivity and some snakes need certain stimuli to breed in captivity. But sometimes I don't know if we know what we're talking about. If you know what I mean. Especially for snakes in weird sort of subtropical, semi-tropical situations. I'm talking about Madagascar and Australia too, and parts of Central America. Like it's always been weird. It was like, I'm going to brumate my Honduran milk snake the same as all my other ones. I'm like, what? Does that match the climate? Or why does a tegu want to brumate exactly the same as a North American colubrid? I don't know. Emma says, I think windows and natural sunlight are key. Yes. Or like UV lights, natural-ish sunlight that's bright on timers. But there's clearly something going on. There's more going on to like winter ecology of reptiles than we give them credit for. Because a lot of people are like, well, it's my break. I'm going to go on vacation. It's more than that. It's either a physiological process that you actually need to protect them from in some ways, or one that you need to manage them through to hit whatever sort of hormone changes they need correctly. Because it's all of the hormone papers, it seems quite stressful, actually, just to be continuously cold. Even if they tolerate it well, even if they don't look like they're suffering, they kind of are. And sometimes I wonder if that's why they're like compelled to come out and bask in 40-degree sunlight when they're 32. They're just like, I just need to get warmer by any means necessary. Dark. All right, that's all I got. I don't know. Did we learn anything? I was just going to cut it off short because I talked too fast, I think. If anybody has any questions, let's crack a cold one. There are 11 people here, so that's pretty good. Thanks for coming. Oh, man. Jennifer says, I don't think we even scratched the surface on figuring them out. I think we sort of accidentally figured out things that work, but don't know why, and that's why we still get it wrong. Right. Correct. Yeah, and it's hard because you're talking about all different stuff. All different species, different locations. Like in the Cowles paper where the snakes were living in the sand dunes, did they need to live in a sand dune, or was that the only sort of possible place? Did they need to be 1 inch under the sand, or was that just a dumb lizard and it really should have been ideally 12 inches? Or is there something about that process of like winter physiology that was necessary? I don't know. It's hard. Lowest temperature I went was probably like 48 or something in the closet in Washington. Here, nothing is cold, even when it's cold. So my snakes here come out of brumation skinnier than when I put them in. It's not cold enough, and I don't like it. But I have so many snakes, I can't put them all in a refrigerator. So either I build a shed, put a cool bot in it, and put an AC unit, or something like that. What I end up having to do is a lot of my snakes don't make follicles right away. I brumate them, I wake them up, I feed them a bunch, and after the first shed, they're not ready to be paired. They get paired usually like after the second shed, like a month later, because they actually need to like gain some weight back from brumation. But that still works. They still make babies. So like, I don't know if we have to be 100% prescriptive for temperature or time or timing of follicles. No, we're not done. Build a one. No, I don't have one big enough. That's what I'm saying. I would need a wine cooler in my living room, basically. You know. What actually triggers follicular development? Seeing each other's scent. I know. Well, you're smart. I don't know if anybody knows. A lot of like female colubrids will build follicles by themselves in a one-person pet home, decide nobody's around, and reabsorb them with no brumation. So doesn't that sound like calorie surplus? And maybe they had cues from the windows, from the temperature of the room, from their cold spot, whatever. But I think they know that their little bodies should prepare for a man to come, even if he's not there yet. And they haven't had all the cues. I don't know. They'll do it anyway. Yeah, I think it's a good resale value. It can be bougie, right? Could it be that they're plastic and it kind of doesn't matter as long as the parameters are in a big range, they can adapt? Yes. I think the other thing to think about is a lot of the snakes that we have in North America today haven't been there very long. Like, we're in a little we're still in an ice age technically, but we're in an interglacial period. So the glacial retreat has been relatively recent, which sounds crazy. You're like, what? You know, so the snakes that are in somewhere, Pennsylvania, let's just pick Pennsylvania, pick on Pennsylvania right now, are snakes that were living in Texas 10,000 years ago. Maybe. So the ability to do things in Texas and do things in Pennsylvania has to be built into the sauce for now. And maybe more stable places where like the thermal environment hasn't been so weird, maybe they're not as flexible and they need brumations and all this stuff. Maybe that's why, like, because like you can see these like immigration corridors post-glacial retreat in the US. And the only one that's like particularly weird and fixed are fox snakes. Like you can see how the fox snake range was like intersected by glaciers and then like bifurcated and then bifurcated again. So like, and those snakes are very particular and weird about brumation temperature and duration, and they aren't as successful. But a lot of the common stuff that sort of putzes around and seems to do good in captivity, North American colubrid wise, are like a post-glacial retreat species, which maybe makes them more plastic. I think it depends on the ones, is what I'm saying. There's a fox snake paper. Y'all should read it. It is wild. That shows what fox snakes have been dealing with. Last time I heard anything, I think it was the University of Louisiana. Sean Bradley said that snake semen could not be resuscitated after being frozen. They didn't know why. So even though you can extract it with, I'm pretty sure they used electrolysis. So they like activated the muscles with electricity around the testes. You could collect it. You could put it in a little semen vial. You could technically maybe ship it fresh, but you couldn't freeze it for storage, like semen straws for storage later. And I think it's just probably a process to figure out how we freeze snake semen or eggs. But I guess the question is like, how would you know when to inseminate a snake also? Because snakes can store sperm, and different species store them in different spots. And how much of that snake's fertilization is happening because the semen was already present there at the time the egg came down? I don't know. Nobody knows that. Manual snake milkers. I don't know if you can milk a snake also, because I mean, hopefully everybody knows this. Snakes don't ejaculate. And they don't have a tube. They have like a channel in the hemipene, so that the sperm has to like dribble out and then crawl up the hemipene into the girl snake. That's not very sexy sounding now that I said it out loud. So that's why a lot of them stay locked or have mechanisms to stay into each other, hooks and barbs and accessories, because they need time for the sperm to crawl up, in, over. Oh, God. Yeah, I don't know if it would be. So in a lot of species, like you can get embryos and sperm, and it's maybe good or bad. You can decide. It ends up being like kind of expensive, and so like you need it would need to be really good. Like the payoff would need to be really good. But would anybody really want that in like ball pythons, where they're like milking some sunset clown pied for all he's worth by electrocuting his little testes to sell to other people? Would you really want that? No. Yeah, but all products of a snake are restricted by CITES, including their semen. So you couldn't even get the semen out anyway, or embryos. What people need to do is have like a one-time amnesty thing with Australia. Just ask Australia very nicely and just keep asking them. Just like, hey, for 6-month period, can we have a amnesty for exports for breeding purposes from captive to captive only, and people have to apply for permits. That's what they should do. And I know people sort of have, just like, hey, please. I don't know if they will. I don't know if they care, All right, everybody. We did an hour. I feel like that's content. I feel like we've made content. I don't think we learned anything as usual. And 100% as usual, this isn't necessarily like perfect. Like, it's not, don't listen to me. Go do your own research. I gave you the citations in the description. Go check it out. Go read it. It's not supposed to be exhaustive either, because there are, I don't know, here's an example of something I just skipped because I just felt like it. Like, western pond turtles unusually also brumate terrestrially. So I skipped lots of things, but I wanted to highlight the things that I thought were fun. Yes, but if you don't know when to turkey baste your diamond python, it's all for naught anyway. You know? Well, a lot of the dog semen, I mean, like, mammals make more sense because we can tell when they're receptive or whatever. And we can even induce it. Like, I mean, you've seen it, like cows and goats and stuff like that. You can put a cedar in of a particular hormone. It looks like it's on like a little tampon. It actually keeps them from, it suppresses their normal cycle. You pull it out, it induces ovulation within a week. So you know exactly when you're supposed to AI them. You stake them all up. We would have to have some sort of system like that for snakes, because you can't, like, I don't know, have a test buck a test buck for snakes to show you when that snake is receptive, because the snake would accidentally breed the other snake. There's no way to do that. We would need sort of, I don't know, blood hormone assays and snake cedars. Do y'all want to put tampons in your snake's cloaca to get them not to ovulate and then to ovulate? It's not going to happen. Quirky induced a bitch with some hogs. Someone for hogs. This about dogs or dogs? I'm hoping it's about dogs, not a person or a pig, but I'm assuming. Right, we would have to have that capability. And I was thinking about it, like, it could be a hormone patch, but then snakes shed their skin. So, like, where are you going to insert the cedar so you know when she ovulates? And then, like, how much follicular development happens because she knows boys are around and hot? And so, like, you would have to wait until you knew that was sort of peaking, and then, I don't know. I just don't think it's possible. I don't think it's possible. Sorry. We can't even, like, anesthetize snakes correctly currently. We can barely put them under for surgery and bring them back out without them dying. We're not good at even that. Yeah, that's what I assumed, but then you said hogs, and I was like, you can't insert around Jen. I don't know if we have to, is what I'm saying. It would make the animal science part of this much more scientific, but I don't know if y'all noticed. Largely, the hobby is sort of like very casual and, no offense, like, sort of pull them up by my bootstraps. I'm gonna make a rack out of a Home Depot rack and melamine boards. So, like, I don't know if people are ready to be that cool yet, even if we could be cool. What would be maybe more cool is if you could buy embryos from people, strip the embryo from an egg of a species you don't care about, no offense, and put in the new embryo into the egg. That's more possible to me. Like known embryos, you ship the embryo frozen, insert it into like a ball python egg. You're like, I want Bolins. I want infinity Bolins. And so So where would you harvest the eggs though? We can't freeze the eggs. So you'd have to like constantly be harvesting the eggs out of something. Not like the intact eggs, but like the embryos and the eggs. And then freezing and shipping that to be reinserted into eggs in the US. Too much work. Okay. It wasn't a lie. We're still working on the details, is what I'm saying. I think the problem is like, I don't know, just because you have the DNA code or something, and I don't know if y'all have listened to like the rewilding community about, making mammoths or dodo birds or whatever. There's too much extra stuff about it. Mitochondrial DNA. Like you need a close relative anyway, so you have the mitochondria in the egg, and if you pull out all the genetic material, and then like none of the epigenetic stuff is intact at that point. Like congratulations, you put together the DNA, but all of the important epigenetic part is not there also. So what is the expression of that animal even going to be? So sorry, everybody. I do want passenger pigeons, though. I think that'd be fire. Everything else, whatever. All right. Member Live will be, I don't know when it'll be. I need somebody to come on to argue about the Mark of the Beast. That exists currently. So if anybody wants to volunteer for that, I don't even know where I'm at anymore. I give up trying to figure out motive. So I'm just going to go with I give up mostly. So maybe Saturday. Depends on who wants to volunteer. You have to have strong feelings about it because then that'll be spicy. But otherwise. The problem with Tasmanian tigers is what is the conspecific you're going to put them in? Devils? Or the heterospecific devils? But they're so much smaller. What am I talking about? I'm scared to be truthful. Okay, fine. It's the end of the podcast. The green check marks on Wharf Market. I would like someone to come on to share feelings. Whatever your feelings are, you can share them. But it's maybe I don't know if it's been something. Let's put it that way. Member Live. So the drama will stay on Member Lives as usual. Hyrax. I don't even think they're related. Exactly. All right. Bye, everybody. Hopefully you enjoyed whatever just happened.